Welcome back. We're just going to continue with group work 8 and I'm currently on page 48. We're just going to have a look at distinct count. So the first thing to do is just ensure that your cursor is in the pivot table, and we're going to create a new measure called product with sales. So just pop up to measures, new measure. Now this measure is going to be in the sales table, and we'll give it a name of product with sales. And we're going to be using the distinct count. Now the tooltip there says counts the number of distinct values in a column. So we're looking in the sales and we want to know how many of the products we've actually sold. So it will be the product key that tells us the product that the customer bought. It's going to be a whole number, and we'll use a separator. Check the formula, we haven't missed anything, parenthesis, etc., and click on OK. Okay, let's have a look at this. So our accessories in total, number of products is 35. And of those 35 products, we've sold 22 of them. So distinct count is different from the count function. The count is simply counting the number of occurrences in total, whereas the distinct count is counting a singular occurrence. So if we've sold 5 bikes in the same category, they're exactly the same 5 bikes as far as the model's concerned, distinct count will only record 1, whereas the count function would count 5. Let's make our pivot table a little bit more interesting. We're going to add a slicer. Slicers bring our pivots to life, and they're such a fantastic filtering tool and a convenient filtering tool for our end users. They lend themselves well to dashboards, and they're one of my favourite tools in Excel. So we've got to make a little bit of room for our slicer, so we're going to move our pivot table. So we're just highlighting, and if you hover over, can you see that? On any edge you get a 4-headed arrow. Anywhere on the edge you'll get a 4-headed arrow, and we're just going to click with our mouse and drag down to cell B8. Once we're there, we just let go of our mouse. Now ensure your cursor is in your pivot, and then if you go to the insert menu and under the filters group, then if you select slicer, we've got a representation of all of our tables. It's actually, at the moment we're on active, and the only 2 active tables currently in our pivot table is products and sales. But if you select the all button, then you've got a representation of all of the current tables in our model. So we're going to insert the color slicer from the products table. So there's our hierarchy. Under more fields we've got color, and you can just select that and click on OK, and there is our slicer. So I'm going to move that to cell B3, just up there in the corner, and then resize it to fit the cell range B3 to F6 or thereabouts. Okay, it looks a bit odd at the moment, but up in the contextual tab for slicer tools, if I click away it disappears. If I click on the slicer you get your contextual tool, and under the buttons group we've got columns, and we can increase to 5. I'm just going to pull that down ever so slightly. The other thing is, if you don't have a lot of room, what you can do is decrease the height as well of the buttons, so you can play around with that, and you can adjust the width either of the slicer as a whole or the buttons themselves. Okay guys, let's just move that a little bit further down, and I'm going to increase the height again. That's about right. Okay, so our slicer works by filtering, and we can see as we make our selections the number of red products, for example, and how many of those products we've sold in the red colour, black and blue, and we can start to drill down as well to get a little bit more detail about those sales. One other thing to point out, do you notice as we make our selections, as we start drilling down, that the pivot itself is resizing? What we can do is try to get the pivot at its maximum. So I've just selected bikes here and then expanded the subcategory a little bit further, or the product name in actual fact a little bit further down. I'm going to right click now anywhere on the pivot. If you go to pivot table options, just down here we've got an option called auto fit column widths on update. Now we want to deselect that and then click on OK. Now what happens is that regardless of how you drill into your pivot, it won't change shape. It will hold the width, which is fabulous. Another thing to point out for 2016 users is that when we inserted the slicer, we went to the insert menu, but what we can do again for Excel 2016 users is right click on any of the columns. So we selected colour from the products table. There it is, just there. You can right click and you've got the option to add slicer. Okay. Otherwise, as I say, you would go to insert and the slicer option there, and then you've got all of your options and you just tick which one that you want. Okay chaps, so quite short and sweet, but I hope that highlights the difference for you between the count and the distinct count. So if we've sold 5 bicycles and they're all model X, then distinct count will count only 1, whereas the count function would record 5. So I hope that's clear, guys. Now next up we're going to be looking at date fields in preparation for practice exercise 8, and we'll be creating those date fields, those new date fields, as calculated columns in our data model. So I'll see you in the next video lecture.